Hi, everybody. My name is Peter Taraka. I'm the manager of aircraft restoration here at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum. We are in the Intrepid's aircraft restoration hangar, and what I'll be working on today is I'm putting some final touches on the markings on our Bell AH-1J Sea Cobra, an attack helicopter from around the Vietnam conflict era. If you have any, I'm going to get right to it. If you have any questions about what I'm doing, write them down in the chat and I'll stop what I'm doing and do my best to answer your questions.
So Peter, can you have a breakdown what you're actually doing here and why you're doing it?
What I'm doing is specifically I'm applying a second coat of paint to these black colored markings, which I had applied a couple of weeks ago. And what I'm doing on the overall finish is I'm sort of aging the look of the paint. It came out a little glossier than I'd hoped for it to come out in different places on the machine. And I've gone over it with rubbing compound and super fine sandpaper, like over 400 grade. And what that did is in some of the places where I had the initial markings painted on, it removed some of the paint. So I'm putting a second coat over those markings, and unfortunately that second coat will also be glossy, but I'll just give it a fine, maybe go over it with a fine buffing of rubbing compound just to remove the gloss.
Now, Peter, do you have any little information on the history of this helicopter that you're working on? Do you know anything about it, where it came from, any stats that the viewers might find interesting?
Certainly. This helicopter was designed in the 1960s when they started to design it. In 1969. In 1970, the first prototype flew, and it didn't enter active service until 1972. This machine here, this exact machine, in the records, it wasn't, it didn't enter active service until 1974. And it was used as a training machine, and its records reflect it having flown between or having served at bases in Texas, Arizona, and California. And that was pretty much all of its active life, was going between those three airports, air bases. And except for one tiny anomaly where for not even a year, it served in Japan, which is kind of unusual, but when you realize that it's a Marine helicopter and it spends a lot of time on an aircraft carrier, it went on a small tour. So we don't have any records or Marine service records after 1992, and it didn't come here until 1994. So.
And it's not it's what type of helicopter is it? It's designed for what exactly? It's not a rescue helicopter as such.
No, it's an attack helicopter. It's a ground troop support machine. This particular model, the Sea Cobra, had a pretty large and capable gun mounted to the front of it. So it was particularly good at defending against ground-based tanks and armored vehicles. And it's what makes it special is it has two engines. That's why it was called the Sea Cobra, because of Marine operations. They would be doing a lot of flying off ships over water, and they wanted the redundancy of two engines. And another interesting point, it's the only aircraft here at Intrepid in our collection that came to the ship under its own power. The Marine crew flew it here, signed over the papers to Intrepid, and went home. That was the end of it. So that's an interesting point there.
Okay, we have one question from our viewers. Is the Cobra still in service?
Yes. The Cobra is still in service. As this machine has gone through its gestation, there was the A model, the B model. I'm working on the J model, and the machine that's presently in use is the A1HZ model. It is substantially updated from this machine, much more capable. But I don't know. I'm wondering, after Z, what is there? I have to go back to A, I guess. Oh. In fact, the ship came, and during Fleet Week, it had parked over on the pier next to where Intrepid is located, and they had a Z model over there, while at the same time we were working on this. So we went over and paid a visit and took a bunch of photographs. Although outside of the basic airframe, not much of what's there applies to this machine because there were so many small subtle changes. A lot of people do what I'm doing with vinyl appliques or something of that nature, but we have found that given the extreme weather conditions that these machines are exposed to out on the flight deck, they peel off. They're not as resilient as paint. Excuse me for 1 second. Thank you.
Okay, there's another question. Do you restore cockpits as well as the exterior?
That is very much a case-by-case situation. I'll tell you why, because some of the aircraft, I would say almost the majority of the airplanes we have here at Intrepid, the internals have been removed. And some of them, even the cockpits have been painted over to protect the internals from UV exposure, if anyone was wondering why we do that. But in the case of this machine, the instrument panels and the rest of the interior is all pretty much intact. So my assistant, Kate Good, spent, I don't know how much, 2 weeks. 2 weeks cleaning and detailing all of the instrumentation inside the cockpit on this machine. It's kind of a shame that we're going to have to, when this machine is completed, we're going to seal those cockpits up. But they're preserved. That's the important thing. Now, fortunately for me, I have a whole bunch of yellow paint that I can, after this dries, I can go back and straighten out any crooked lines.
We've got another question. Do you always hand paint the lettering and markings?
That's a good question. Excuse me. That depends also. If it is a national insignia the size of a star and bar, it's a 6-foot-long thing that is pretty straightforward, we will use a template, and it'll be much easier because we're usually something that large, we're applying spray paint for something like that. But if it's something smaller like this, or this serial number, I prefer to do it by paint. Everybody has their own way of doing it. This is what I like to do, and I think it may have been viewed as unorthodox, but it seems to have great longevity out there on the flight deck, and that's what we're after.
Okay, we've got another question. When did the Intrepid receive the Cobra?
Our record shows that it was flown here in 1994. That was back in the day when you could land helicopters on Intrepid.
Okay, Kristen wants to know, what has been your favorite restoration project so far?
Oh, there's no question about that, Kristen. Uh, the aircraft in question is the Douglas Skyraider, and it's an airplane that it spent a lot of time, squadrons of them spent a lot of time flying and landing on the decks of Intrepid. And when I first started working here, which is about 10 years ago, we didn't have one. And I knew we really needed to have one in order to tell some historic stories about Sky Raiders flying from Intrepid. And my boss, who has more contacts than contacts, hooked up with the curator of the Marine Corps Museum in Virginia, who had a Sky Raider, but he didn't have any room for it in his museum. And would we be interested? And it was in pretty rough shape, but we brought it here back in probably 2016, and me and the team spent over 2 years restoring it, and that was just a great 2 years. So it's out there on the flight deck, and when we open up, I hope you can come see it. It's a beauty.
Okay, we have another question. Where on the flight line will the Sea Cobra go?
It and another helicopter, which is nearly completed also. That's a great thing about helicopters. We can usually only fit one airplane in here, but since helicopters have a relatively small footprint, we've decided to do two helicopters that needed it. And they will both be out. Maybe you want to swing around and have a look. We have our Sikorsky Chickasaw, which is essentially complete, but we're waiting until we reopen to the public to bring both the Sikorsky Chickasaw and the Cobra that I'm working on now out in a grand rollout, and they're basically going to go in the same spot that they were in previous before we brought them in, which is sort of our helicopter group. We do have a Harrier, McDonnell Douglas Harrier, in that location also, but it sort of fits the description, being a vertical takeoff and landing machine.
How long have you been working at the museum, Peter?
Very nearly 10 years. I started life as a graphic designer. In fact, most of my working career was in graphic design. And I came here to start volunteering. I think it was 2011. And my boss liked what I was doing, and it's now my full-time gig. And I do sort of, as you can see, still make use of the graphic design skills that I learned. But I would never go back to that world. I love it here. Just going to switch up colors now because I see some yellow areas that need a little work.
So the question is, was the Cobra in good condition when you received it? What other restoration work did you have to perform on it?
Good question, because when this came here in '92, even being manufactured when it's still the newest aircraft we have in our collection, aside from like the Space Shuttle Enterprise. So it didn't have nearly the type of corrosion problems that we were looking at the Sikorsky Chickasaw, which is a 1950s machine. So essentially, all this machine required is a thorough cleaning and treatment with preservatives and a fresh paint job, and it's ready to go. So this is probably, of the 6+ restorations that I've been involved in since I came here, this was by far the least invasive. Oh, was that a two-part question?
Sorry. Okay. Okay, another question. Has there been any sort of restoration on the A12?
Ah, yes. The A-12. Yes, the A-12 was in the process of a complete renovation. But a couple of things are, a couple of minor obstacles are turning it into a slightly more protracted project than something like this. We can't fit it in the hangar to work on it. And B, because of that, we are slaves to Mother Nature. So right now, when there's lots of snow on the flight deck, we're pretty limited. We can do some research about how we want to treat various aspects of the project, but as far as having hands-on, that's going to have to wait until, who knows, mid-April. We'll see what Mother Nature has to say about it. In the meantime, we are, as you may have seen if you've been following this, Kate is in the process of renovating the A-12's start cart, which is a machine which generates the power required to start the engines. The A-12, as part of its incredible engineering effort, and top on the list for all the engineers was, we need to save weight. We need to keep this machine as light as possible for it to fly as fast as it does. So systems like starters for the engines, which on a lot of airplanes are part of the structure, were eliminated, and a separate start cart was designed, which, getting the airplane ready for flight was a multi-layered affair, where this start cart would be used to start one of the engines, and then after they got that engine started, the start cart would need to be moved over to the other side of the airplane to start the second engine. Yeah, so anyway, back to the project. We hope to get, depending on what the pandemic does, we hope to get corporate groups, other volunteers involved in the painting of that airplane, because it's colossal, especially when you're working with a paintbrush like this. All right.
All right, Benedict would like to know, were the munitions on aircraft on the Intrepid ever live, or are they all replica?
Everything we have here is replica, or the majority of what we have is replica. If it isn't replica, then it's certified deactivated. I think in a couple of cases, there may be auxiliary fuel tanks, or what are commonly referred to as drop tanks, mounted on the wings of airplanes. They've been thoroughly cleaned out, and yeah, so it's safe. Although I do have a story about this very machine. I was saying earlier that it was the first one to come on board to come here under its own power. They landed it here, and after all the pomp and circumstance was over, we had. Oh, I wasn't here, but I've heard about this. Uh, there was still fuel in the fuel tanks. Uh, of course, it needed fuel to get here, and I guess it was the first time that we had to, or Intrepid, the people taking care of the airplanes, had to deal with that, with the, I don't know, the can't think of the word, deal with having to contact the officials necessary, or the technicians necessary to come to the ship and remove all of the fuel from the helicopter, in addition to other fluids and things that don't belong on a museum aircraft. What I'm doing here is I'm touching up a bunch of the rivet heads. During my earlier, I was describing to you my earlier sort of aging of the finish and removing the gloss. The buffing and the light sanding that I did removed the paint from the very heads of these rivets. You can zoom in on that. You can see. I would probably find a more find a more time efficient way to do this if it weren't for the fact that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and I can put the TLC into this project that it really deserves.
Do you have a dream aircraft that you would like to work on one day?
Well, that's a loaded question, because I have mine, but then I have another one which I think would be more appropriate, or be more appropriate than my dream airplane for Intrepid to make this collection more complete. There are two airplanes that I have in mind. Both of them are extremely rare, so we'd be very lucky to obtain one of these. One is a Grumman Hellcat, and the other one is a Vought Corsair. You may be familiar with both of those types, but they both flew from Intrepid, so it would be great to add one of those to our collection.
Benedict would like to know, will you ever be restoring the F-14 live?
Don't really know. There are several airplanes out there in the collection that are ripe for restoration. They start sitting out there in the weather for years and years. They start to look kind of rough. The F-14 hasn't reached that point yet, but I can see where, just like everything else out there, it's slowly approaching that point where it will be ready to be brought in. That is I don't know if you've ever stood next to one, but it's a huge airplane. Maybe not as big as the A-12. We could get it in here, but it would take up the whole space. It'd be a pretty exciting project. It would, yeah. So the answer is, I don't know. Sorry. Any more questions? I guess painting rivet heads isn't all that riveting.
When will the restoration on the Cobra be complete?
Oh, my boss keeps asking me that one. Well, we're hoping to roll it out when the ship reopens. So tentatively, mid-March, could be mid-April, but certainly before, I'm hoping before May, because we have other projects that need attention.
All right, this is our last question, Peter.
Yeah.
After you finish work on the Cobra, what is the next project your team will work on?
We have a Navy airplane called the Grumman Cougar, which is out there on display right now. And it has some unique problems. I mean, in addition to the regular deterioration that goes on, there's a certain, on the left wing of the airplane, for some reason, the paint will not stick to the metal. We've tried a number of different methods, and it just won't stick. So that's going to come in, maybe not for a complete redo, but we're certainly going to try yet another method and see if we can get that problem straightened out and touch up some of the other smaller regular deterioration stuff that's going on. That won't be a very long project, we hope, because in fall of 2021, again, fingers crossed here, we are hoping to receive another airplane, and I can't really go into detail on that because everything's in motion. There's a lot of fluidity out there. But if that project does indeed come, it will be an all hands on deck project. We're looking forward to that. So stay tuned. Okay, thank you for visiting, and we hope you tune in next week for another episode. I believe Kate will be, I don't really know what she'll be doing, but it'll be interesting, probably more interesting than this. Anyway, thank you very much.